Have you ever felt like you are standing at the edge of a new beginning, but uncertainty holds you back? Could it be that this moment, right now, is your chance to embrace a change you've been praying for? C.S. Lewis once wrote, "There are far, far better things ahead than any we leave behind. Do you believe that God is calling you into something better? A season of transformation." In Isaiah 43, verse 19, God declares, "See, I am doing a new thing. This isn't just a message for someone else, it's for you." Right now, God is preparing a way through your wilderness, bringing streams to your dry places. His promise of renewal isn't distant or unreachable, it's here, unfolding before your very eyes. What new thing might God be doing in your life, even in the places where hope seems barren? Stay with me as we dive deeper into this message. Let's explore together what it means to step into God's season of change, to trust that His promise of transformation is not only possible but already in motion. You are on the brink of something extraordinary. Are you ready to see it? In life, we often find ourselves in moments that feel like wandering through a desert, endless, dry, and void of hope. But God's promise to us is that He is doing something new, even when the landscape of our lives seems barren. In Isaiah 43, verse 19, God says, "Behold, I am doing a new thing, now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" This powerful statement is not just a reassurance, but an invitation to trust in His sovereignty. God is asking us to have faith in His ability to create a path where none existed before, to bring forth life from desolation. It's a reminder that God is not bound by our human limitations. His perspective sees beyond our struggles into the flourishing future He has planned. C.S. Lewis offers a profound analogy in his work, Mere Christianity. He compares the Christian journey to a house under renovation. Initially, we may expect simple repairs, fixing a leak here or painting a wall there. But before long, we realize that God intends to rebuild the house entirely, creating something far more magnificent than we ever envisioned. In the same way, when God says He is doing something new, He is not simply adjusting small parts of our lives. He is transforming us from the inside out, preparing us for something far greater than we can imagine. Consider the image of a gardener tending to a garden during winter. To the untrained eye, the garden appears lifeless, nothing but barren soil and a bleak landscape. But the gardener knows that beneath the surface, seeds are lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to burst into life. In the same way, God works in the hidden places of our hearts and minds, often during the seasons when we feel stagnant or lost. What we perceive as a time of emptiness may be a period of divine preparation. Just as winter gives way to spring, bringing new growth and beauty, God promises to bring transformation in His perfect timing. C.S. Lewis also reminds us of the necessity of trusting God in these moments of waiting. He says, relying on God has to begin all over again every day as if nothing had yet been done. This speaks to the daily act of surrendering our fears and uncertainties to Him, trusting that His plans are unfolding even when we cannot see immediate results. Our faith must be anchored not in our circumstances, but in the unwavering truth that God is always in control. His timing, though often mysterious to us, is perfect. In our lives, just like the garden or the house under construction, God is working. What seems like desolation or delay is often a precursor to new beginnings. He is making a way in the wilderness, creating streams in the wasteland. His work in us is continual, His love for us unchanging. We are called to trust in His providence, knowing that the barren seasons are merely the preparation for the abundant harvest that is to come. Let us anchor our faith in the certainty that God's plans are always good, perfect, and ultimately lead to our transformation. Life can be unpredictable, and challenges often come when we least expect them. Yet, the Bible teaches us to place our unwavering trust in God's faithfulness and perfect timing. When life feels desolate and overwhelming, it can be tempting to question God's plan, but Scripture assures us that He is working all things for our good. Romans 8, verse 28. Often, when we feel as though we are walking through a desert, God is preparing to lead us to a place of abundant blessings. Trusting in His timing requires surrender, acknowledging that our human perspective is limited, but His view encompasses the whole picture of our lives. One of the most profound lessons of faith is learning to embrace God's timing. As C.S. Lewis so beautifully stated, "I am sure that God keeps no one waiting unless He sees that it is good for him to wait." In moments of waiting, it's easy to feel forgotten. But these are the moments where God is molding us, preparing something far greater than we can imagine. Just as the farmer must wait for the crop to grow, we must wait for the seeds of God's promises to bloom in our lives. His timing is always perfect, even when we struggle to understand it. Every delay serves a purpose in our spiritual growth, teaching us patience, perseverance, and dependence on Him. In our periods of waiting, prayer becomes a powerful tool of transformation. Prayer is not just about asking for God's intervention in our circumstances, but about inviting Him to reshape our hearts. Through prayer, we are reminded that God is both the author and finisher of our faith, Hebrews 12, verse 2. When we pray, "God's turnaround is coming in my life," we aren't simply reciting words, we are aligning ourselves with His will, declaring faith in His ability to bring about change. Prayer is the channel through which we tap into God's power, and it's where our personal transformation begins. It's in those intimate moments with God that we begin to see things from His perspective. The act of declaring His promises aloud strengthens our faith and helps us shift from despair to hope. The story of Job is perhaps one of the most poignant examples of how trust in God's timing and prayer can lead to restoration. Job was a man of immense faith and wealth, yet in a brief moment, his world fell apart. He lost everything: his wealth, his children, his health, yet he remained steadfast in his belief that God would see him through. The story of Job speaks directly to our modern-day struggles, especially when it feels as though life is collapsing around us. In Job's darkest moments, he questioned, lamented, and grieved, but he never abandoned his trust in God's justice and goodness. Job's suffering was not the end of his story. God restored him, blessing him with more than he had before his trials. The lesson of Job is clear: no matter how deep the pit of despair, God can lift us out and restore what was lost, often in ways far beyond our expectations. Just as Job experienced a period of captivity, being held in the grip of suffering and anguish, many of us face our own forms of captivity today. For some, this captivity takes the form of financial crisis, failed businesses, or lost jobs. In an age where financial stability can crumble overnight, it's easy to feel like we're being held captive by circumstances beyond our control. But here's the truth: financial hardship, though painful, does not define our future. The Bible reminds us in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This verse speaks directly to those in the midst of financial struggles, assuring them that God's plans are for restoration and blessing. The modern world's financial challenges, whether due to market crashes, layoffs, or business failures, mirror the loss that Job experienced. But just as Job's story did not end with ruin, neither do the financial crises we face today have the final say. Job's restoration came because of his steadfast faith in God's goodness. Likewise, our faith in God's ability to turn things around in our lives is critical. Financial instability may feel like captivity, but with God, there is always a promise of freedom and restoration. This leads us to an important call to action: to actively declare God's promises over our lives. The Bible tells us that there is power in the tongue, Proverbs 18, verse 21, and by speaking life into our circumstances, we align ourselves with God's truth. Declare, "God's turnaround is coming in my life." When we prophesy this over our situations, we are not ignoring the reality of our struggles. Instead, We are choosing to believe that God's word is greater than our trials. Faith is not passive, it requires action. Just as Job remained faithful in his suffering, trusting that God would deliver him, we too must take active steps to proclaim God's promises in our lives. This declaration is not rooted in wishful thinking, but in the deep assurance that God is faithful to fulfill His word. As we declare His goodness, we begin to see our perspective shift. What once seemed impossible now seems possible because we know that with God, all things are possible. Matthew 19, verse 26. Trusting in God's faithfulness and declaring His promises are acts of gratitude. We are thankful not just for what He has done, but for what He is doing and will do in our lives. As C.S. Lewis once wrote, "We ought to give thanks for all fortune if it is good, because it is good. If bad, because it works in us patience, humility, and the contempt of this world and the hope of our eternal country." Gratitude shifts our focus from what we lack to the abundance of God's grace in every season of life. Whether we are in a season of waiting, praying for a turnaround, or enduring personal suffering, we must remember that God's faithfulness is unwavering. Like Job, we may experience loss, but with faith, prayer, and active declaration, we can be assured that God's turnaround is on the horizon. His timing is perfect, His plans are good, and He is always working for our restoration. Let us, therefore, hold fast to His promises and live in the hope of His coming transformation. Life is often full of trials and heartaches that challenge the very core of our faith, and few stories in the Bible capture the weight of human suffering like the story of Job. Job's journey of loss, despair, and eventual restoration offers us a powerful message about faith, resilience, and divine intervention. When we reflect on the magnitude of Job's suffering, we can see how his experience mirrors the deepest pains of our own lives: family loss, health struggles, strained relationships, isolation from friends, and perhaps most difficult of all, the temptation to abandon faith when it seems that God is silent. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Job's story is the loss of his children. Family is central to our lives, and the death of loved ones is an unfathomable grief. Job's loss of his children can seem like an unbearable blow, shaking the foundations of his personal life. In such moments of loss, the words of C.S. Lewis come to mind. God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Job's pain was a shout from God, a moment of profound suffering that carried a deeper spiritual purpose, even if Job could not understand it at the time. It's a reminder that loss is not the end, but rather a chapter in a larger story of redemption. Job's suffering didn't stop with the loss of his family. He was afflicted with painful sores that covered his entire body. His health deteriorated rapidly, adding to his physical and emotional agony. In this, we see a reflection of our own experiences with illness and the fragility of our human bodies. Yet even in his darkest hours, Job did not curse God or lose faith. This is reminiscent of the Apostle Paul's words in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9, where he says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Job's suffering, like Paul's, became a stage for God's grace and strength to shine, showing us that even in our most broken state, God's power is sufficient. Perhaps even more painful than Job's physical suffering was the strain it placed on his marriage. His wife, overwhelmed by their shared adversity, mocked his faith and advised him to curse God and die. Job 2, verse 9. This strain in their relationship is a reminder of how suffering can test even the strongest of bonds. It is in these moments of relational fracture that we are called to extend grace and understanding. C.S. Lewis wisely said, "To love at all is to be vulnerable." Job's vulnerability was tested as his spouse encouraged him to abandon the very source of his hope. But instead of giving in, Job chose faith, a decision that would lead to unimaginable blessings. Job's friends, too, failed to support him during his time of need, Rather than offering comfort, they accused him of wrongdoing, insisting that his suffering must be a result of sin. Their judgmental approach isolated Job even further, compounding his pain. How often do we face the judgment of others when we are at our lowest, feeling misunderstood and abandoned? In these moments, Job's story reminds us that God alone is our judge, and his perspective is infinitely greater than that of any human being. Proverbs 3, verse 5-6 encourages us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Job's friends could not see the bigger picture, but God was working behind the scenes for Job's ultimate restoration. Despite everything, his loss, his physical suffering, the strain on his marriage, and the isolation from his friends, Job clung to his faith. He continued his spiritual practices, trusting that his suffering was not meaningless. This perseverance and faith, even when there were no visible signs of hope, is one of the most inspiring aspects of Job's story. C.S. Lewis once noted, "Faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods." Job's faith was unshakable because it was rooted in a deep trust in God's plan, even when his circumstances were bleak. Job's steadfast faith was rewarded. God restored his health, his family, and his wealth, blessing him with double what he had lost. This divine restoration illustrates the truth found in Romans 8, verse 28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Job's life is a testament to this promise. His unwavering faith led to a supernatural turnaround, where his deepest losses were not only restored but multiplied. It's a powerful reminder that God's blessings often exceed our expectations when we remain faithful through the storm. Job's story is not just about the restoration of material wealth or physical health, it's about the renewal of strength that comes from trusting God in the darkest of times. When we are at our lowest, it can feel impossible to imagine a future that looks any different from our current suffering. But Job's life teaches us that perseverance, faith, and trust in God can lead to extraordinary blessings. As C.S. Lewis so beautifully put it, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. Job's perseverance positioned him for a supernatural turnaround that could only come from God's hand. In our own lives, we will face moments when we feel like giving up, when the losses seem too great, the pain too overwhelming, and the loneliness too deep. But Job's story stands as a beacon of hope, showing us that God is always at work, even in the silence, even in the suffering. We can take comfort in knowing that, like Job, we are not alone in our trials. God's plan for our lives is greater than we can comprehend, and his blessings are waiting on the other side of our faithfulness. In gratitude, we thank God for guiding us through our trials, for never leaving us even when the world seems to turn against us. Like Job, may we find strength in our faith, trusting that God is always working for our good, preparing us for a future of restoration and abundance. Let Job's story remind us that no matter how dark the night, the dawn of God's blessings is always on the horizon. In life, we often find ourselves weighed down by the trials of family tensions, financial instability, health concerns, or the strain of broken relationships. These challenges can make us feel lost or abandoned, but they are not signs of God's absence. On the contrary, they may be the very moments when God's presence is most powerful. As C.S. Lewis once said, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." When difficulties surround us, it may be God calling us to draw nearer, to tune our hearts to his purpose, and to trust that he has brought us to this moment for a divine reason. It is not by accident that you find yourself reading this message today. God has orchestrated this moment in your life so that you might hear his prophetic words and receive his blessings. In Jeremiah 29, verse 11, we are reminded of his promise, "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. God's purpose is never to leave you in despair, but to use even the darkest valleys as a place where his glory can shine through. This is a call to trust in his timing, to understand that he has prepared a path of restoration that leads to healing, peace, and blessings. God's work in our lives is not always visible at first, but he is actively restoring and transforming your situation. Whether you are struggling with emotional wounds, financial troubles, professional setbacks, or relational turmoil, God's hand is upon you. Just as the Bible says in Isaiah 61, verse 3, he will give you a crown of beauty instead of ashes, the oil of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. Restoration does not mean returning to what was, but rather receiving something far better, God's perfect plan unfolding in your life. In the midst of trials, it can be easy to forget that we serve a God of miracles, a God who does not simply observe our pain from afar, but intervenes in powerful and tangible ways. The same God who parted the Red Sea for Moses, who brought the walls of Jericho crashing down for Joshua, and who raised Lazarus from the dead, is the God who can change your most impossible situation. When we look to Scripture, we see that God has been working miracles since the beginning of time, and he has not stopped. The God of yesterday's miracles is the same today and forever. As Hebrews 13, verse 8 affirms, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This unchanging nature of God assures us that he still performs miracles in our lives today. Take comfort in the promise found in Psalm 126, verse 4, which says, "Restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in the Negev." This vivid imagery of streams in a barren desert illustrates how God's restoration can bring life to even the driest and most desolate situations. Just as the parched ground is revived by the rush of water, so too will your life be revived by the outpouring of God's grace. When it seems as though all hope is lost, when your circumstances feel like a desert, remember that God specializes in bringing life where none seems possible. His streams of mercy and renewal will flow into your life, restoring what has been broken and reviving what has withered. To experience this divine restoration, faith is essential. Faith is not just believing that God exists, but trusting him with your whole heart, even when the solution is not immediately visible. It is in these moments of uncertainty that God invites us to surrender our fears and place our trust in him. As Proverbs 3, verse 5 to 6 teaches, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." You may not understand why you are facing these challenges, but God sees the bigger picture, and he is guiding you through every step. Jesus spoke of the power of faith when he said, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." Matthew 17, verse 20. A mustard seed is incredibly small, yet Jesus used it to illustrate the immense potential of even the tiniest amount of faith. You may feel like your faith is weak or that your prayers are not making a difference, but God honors even the smallest step of faith. He can move mountains in your life, mountains of doubt, fear, and discouragement, when you place your trust in him. This moment is a divine invitation to embrace the power of faith, to believe that God is working in your life, even when the evidence is not yet visible. Trust that he is restoring your heart, your finances, your relationships, and every broken part of your life. Be grateful for the miracles God has already performed and the ones yet to come. As C.S. Lewis wisely noted, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. Your trials are not without purpose. God is shaping you, preparing you, and leading you toward an extraordinary future filled with his blessings. In the face of your challenges, stand firm in your faith. Trust that the God of miracles is at work in your life, restoring and renewing everything that has been broken. Let your heart be filled with gratitude, knowing that God's love for you is steadfast, His plans for you are good, and His power to restore is limitless. God is leading you through this season for a purpose. And on the other side of your challenges, there is a testimony of His faithfulness waiting to be told. Keep believing, keep trusting, and know that God is with you every step of the way. God's power is limitless. And in the midst of life's most difficult challenges, whether financial, relational, or emotional, His intervention brings hope. Just as a child trusts their parent to meet their needs, we are called to trust in God's ability to remove the mountains that block our way. The Bible reassures us time and time again that when we place our faith in Him, He will take care of our every need. As we face moments of financial strain, broken relationships, or even uncertainty about our future, God's promise remains steadfast. His power to lift us out of the depths of despair is not only real but deeply transformative. In the words of C.S. Lewis, hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. These very hardships, which seem so overwhelming, are the means through which God prepares us for the greater things He has in store. This transformation requires something from us as well: surrender. It's not enough to hope for change, we must actively place our worries in His hands. Matthew 6:25-34 reminds us not to be anxious about tomorrow, for God cares for even the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. How much more, then, does He care for us? When we release our burdens, whether they involve money, relationships, or personal struggles, we allow God's plan to unfold. It's a call to trust in His timing, even when it's difficult to see the road ahead. Transformation through faith is not an easy path. It requires a relinquishing of control, something that many find difficult. But what we often forget is that we are never in control to begin with. God is always working behind the scenes, shaping our future, even in the quiet moments where we feel nothing is happening. Isaiah 43 verse 19 tells us, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland." God is not stagnant, nor is He slow to act. When we feel our lives are barren and void of progress, God is in the process of bringing life into the very areas that appear dead. Much like the streams in a desert, which seem impossible in such a dry, desolate place, God is working to bring renewal, even when we can't yet see the waters. In Psalm 126, verse 4, the psalmist cries out, "Restore our fortunes, Lord." Like streams in the Negev, this verse serves as a powerful symbol of God's ability to revive what has been lost. In the arid region of Negev, water is a rarity, yet the psalmist likens God's restorative power to streams flowing through this parched land. This imagery beautifully illustrates how God can take what seems hopeless and transform it into a flourishing, vibrant space. It's a reminder that no matter how desolate our circumstances appear, whether in finances, relationships, or our inner selves, God can and will restore. The same God who brings water to the desert can bring healing to the broken and prosperity to those in need. Our role is to stand firm in faith, trusting that He is already at work, even when the ground feels dry beneath our feet. Hope, anchored in God's promise of restoration, is what sustains us through seasons of hardship. We often mistake the delay in seeing results as God's absence, but His timing is perfect. The restoration He promises is not merely material wealth or the resolution of external problems. It is a restoration of the soul, a renewal of purpose and joy. In times of sorrow and difficulty, we must cling to the knowledge that God's plan is one of abundance. As Romans 8 verse 28 reminds us, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. This doesn't mean life will be without its trials, but it does mean that every trial serves a greater purpose in the divine narrative God is writing in our lives. For those struggling with doubts, wondering if God's promises truly apply to their situation, take comfort in knowing that His word is unwavering. Just as He restored the fortunes of Job after a season of loss, He can restore whatever has been taken from you. And it's not only about material restoration, but about emotional and spiritual wholeness. C.S. Lewis once said, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Sometimes the hardships we face are the very means through which God speaks most clearly, calling us back to Him, inviting us into deeper trust and reliance on His grace. The promise of God's restoration extends beyond our present struggles. It points to a future of joy, where the sorrow of today gives way to the fullness of tomorrow's blessings. It's the hope that fuels our faith, allowing us to walk through the valley of difficulty with confidence that God is leading us to higher ground. We may not see the path clearly, but He does. And as we surrender to His guidance, trusting in His promise, we open ourselves to receive the abundant life He has planned for us. In this moment, let us offer our gratitude to God for guiding us through seasons of difficulty. Even when we don't understand why certain challenges come our way, we can be thankful that we are not alone in facing them. God's hand is upon us, leading, restoring, and preparing us for the new work He is doing in our lives. And as we walk this path of faith, let us remember that His plans for us are always good, even when the journey is hard. Even when we can't see the ways in which God is working, our faith must remain unshaken. Like rain restoring a dry river, God's blessings bring life to the barren areas of our existence. As C.S. Lewis once said, "Faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted. In spite of your changing moods, God's promises of restoration are not idle. They speak to every part of our lives, be it emotional, financial, or relational. We are called to trust in His power to transform what seems lost into abundant blessings. This is not a distant hope, it is a present reality unfolding." Jeremiah 29 verse 11 reminds us that God has plans to prosper us, not to harm us, even if we cannot see it yet. The turnaround is coming, and our dreams are closer than we think. Through His grace, He has guided us, reminding us that no circumstance is beyond His reach. Let us, in gratitude, trust His timing and His ability to breathe new life into our souls, knowing that restoration is imminent.